Hello and welcome back to the Final Lap podcast. My name is Josh. I'm joined as always by Sam. We have plenty to get to today with 3 races, F1, NASCAR, and IndyCar this weekend. All pretty good races as well. First off though, Sam, how are you doing? How did you enjoy the races this weekend?
I'm doing all right. We had quite a busy weekend, a lot going on. Races were kind of up and down as far as quality and what we make of them. But yeah, we still had a good time and always fun with all our main series going on.
Yeah, definitely a busy weekend this weekend with all 3 main series going on. We'll start, though, with F1 in Miami, where Oscar Piastri wins his 4th Grand Prix of the season as he capitalized on a little bit of a Turn 1 scuffle, a little bit of hargy-bargy, as they say, going into Turn 1 with Max Verstappen and Lando Norris. That kind of really wasn't Turn 1, more of Turn 2, where they, kind of got together a little bit. Oscar was able to capitalize on that, get ahead of his McLaren teammate, then later on passing Verstappen to take a 9-second lead. He used that, buffer and that clean air to take a 9-second lead over Lando, who eventually came to finish in 2nd place. Oscar's championship lead now extended to 16 points over his teammate Lando Norris and 32 points over Max Verstappen in 3rd. Just an incredible drive from Oscar, and kind of one of those where he just capitalized on kind of some chaos that happened in front of him and then used that to his advantage. And once you get out in clean air, it's hard to stop that McLaren car, and he took full advantage of that.
Yeah, absolutely. I mean, that car was just flying this weekend. That's the fastest I've seen a car really since the dominant Red Bull days of a couple years ago compared to the rest of the field. That doesn't take away from what Oscar did. He was a lot more, got by Max with a lot more ease. Not to say it was easy, but got by Max in a quicker fashion and was able to turn that into a big lead, which Norris couldn't recover from. Admittedly, Norris did make up some ground, only finished about 4.5 seconds back, and it could have been much worse, but Piastri with another statement win, and now we're up to 4 on the season already, and looking like, another week where Norris is not quite bounced back, still a solid week for him, but another week where Piastri extends his championship lead.
Yeah, so I feel like that McLaren is kind of the big story and takeaway from the weekend, just with how dominant it was. And it's the most dominant we've seen it so far this year, with the fact that the McLarens were able to open up a 32-second gap, I believe it was, in the end over the nearest next driver, which was George Russell, who finished out the podium. And I think that just kind of speak volumes to where McLaren is right now, what they've been able to accomplish with that car. And really, they're just taking full advantage of the situation that they're in right now, which is incredible to consider. Whenever a couple years ago, right here in Miami, they were, nowhere near the pace that they are now. Really what they've been able to do in 2 years has kind of been incredible to watch, and it seemed like nobody was really going to be able to catch up with Red Bull in this, period of an era of car. But McLaren so far has been, able to do that and really exceed even what Red Bull was doing. I wouldn't say that they're, as out front as maybe Max in 23, but with a 32-second gap here in this race, I mean, that's pretty close to kind of what we were seeing from Max in that time period. So really incredible stuff from McLaren, and props to them for kind of the turnaround we've seen from them in this generation of car. I think that's really probably the big takeaway of this weekend, is the dominance of that McLaren is, on full display here.
Yeah, like I was saying at the top, that's by far the fastest I've seen their car, and we expected them to be the best car going into this weekend. Even though I picked Max, I fully expected McLaren to be the best car, and just it's a track that Max knows well and that he's won at multiple times, and just expected him to kind of keep that through. But there was no way he was winning that race this weekend. Those McLarens are just absolutely flying right now, and if this continues over summer, we may get one of those seasons where it's really just one team fighting. It's like a 2016 Mercedes kind of season. We see the back and forth. Don't know if things will escalate between the teammates that quickly, but I think there'll certainly be some fireworks with Piastri and Norris down the stretch. Even though they're getting along pretty well right now, they're going to be the only two, I think, of fighting for this title unless massive upgrades come soon.
Yeah, I think the biggest saving grace for the rest of the field is they're going to make some technical changes to the regulations. I think in the next couple of races here, and that should really be kind of a deciding factor. And I think Max and Red Bull have talked about this as well. Is if they aren't able to get much closer once that hits, because they think that's what they're touching on with those changes is really the strength of the McLaren. If they're not able to get much closer in that time period, I think that they know that they're in for a long season. So that'll be kind of, I think, the big checking point here is when those hit, if they're able to, if the other teams are able to catch up at least a little bit to the McLaren and maybe put some sort of a fight on or a battle here towards the end of the season. I think everyone coming into this year was expecting it to be the most open we've seen it for race wins and podiums, and I thought it was as well. And so far, the McLarens have been the fastest car, but they haven't been as far ahead as they have been this weekend. So we'll see if maybe it was just a Miami thing. Or if this is, truly where we're finding ourselves with the pace difference between the McLaren and everything else right now in these next couple races as well. So I think that'll be really telling with Imola coming up and, some getting into the European swing after that. I think that'll be really telling to kind of judge where we are heading into the rest of the year.
Yeah, you mentioned that potential changes coming soon. They've got the technical directive coming in Spain, which could lead to some big changes on the cars. We don't really know yet. Sometimes those kind of events can produce massive changes, and then other times it ends up being a little bit of a nothing burger. So we'll see how that goes, and maybe that'll shake things up for the year. But I think that's about the only chance that any other team has, especially at the constructors. I mean, McLaren's already over a 100-point lead this early in the year, and even if there's a couple other teams, Red Bull has Max and Ferrari and Mercedes both have very good drivers too. That doesn't, McLaren's drivers are good enough, I think, where even if other teams catch up on pace, unless they're just massively impressive, that won't be enough, that they're going to need some help. So I think, certainly there will be some chances for the field to get closer. But I think, as much as a championship can be wrapped up a quarter of the way through the season, I think it's looking that way with the Constructors' title at least.
Yeah, I agree with you there. And kind of moving to Lando here, and I think that this is kind of the second weekend in a row, or second race in a row, where I feel like Lando was probably the quicker McLaren just on overall pace throughout at least the race. I would say in Saudi he was quicker overall the entire weekend. I think here he was able to out-qualify Oscar in Grand Prix qualifying, so he had that one lap pace, and then I think in the race as well he had the overall pace. So that's 2 weekends in a row where I think if you're Lando, you have you're the quicker of the two, I would say. And yet he comes away with, no wins in either of those races. And that's kind of, I think what's, kind of a championship decider is when you are, when you have the most pace and the best car, you have to win those races. And if you don't, sometimes it's of his own fault. Like I'd say Saudi was his own fault with that qualifying mistake. Here, I wouldn't say this one was as much of his fault. It was kind of just, he got left out to dry on one of those lap one, turn two things that they're going to let the guys, get their elbows out a little bit. And I think Lando was just kind of on the wrong side of it here this weekend. So to me, that's the troubling part for Lando, is that I think he could have had 2 race wins here, and instead his teammate has 2, and now that advantage for Oscar is up to 16 points, which isn't insurmountable to overcome, but I think it's the farther that gap gets wider and wider, the harder it's going to be for McLaren to just say, let these guys race it out. I mean, the good news for him is that they are so far up in the constructors that maybe McLaren won't be as tight on the team orders as they would be if it was a close constructors battle as well. So that would be a plus for Lando in that category of trying to fight back here in this championship. But yeah, I think that the biggest problem right now is that he's had 2 races where, at least in my opinion, he's been the quicker guy. He just hasn't gotten the results out of it that he needs to. And in a championship battle that's this close between 2 teammates with that much pace, I think that's a really troubling thing for Lando to try and overcome.
Yeah, I think it's just with Lando every weekend there's something. I mean, the talent's obviously there. He's one of the better drivers on the grid, and obviously already a multi-time race winner. Could very well be a championship winner one day, but it seems like most weekends there ends up just being one session that throws him off, whether it's the qualifying or the race. Either qualifies too far back and it's a little bit of a struggle to get back up there, or he qualifies on pole and then has one of his mistakes from pole that he's had many times before. This one, like you said, it certainly wasn't his worst race and certainly not his worst weekend. I mean, he wins the sprint. Granted, got a little bit of luck there again with the safety car coming out when it did, but now he comes second in the Grand Prix, and really I think the only criticism you can have is just being a little bit over aggressive there. I mean, it's hard to criticize really a turn 1 or turn 2 lap 1 incident, that early in the race. Things happen unless you absolutely punt someone. It's tough to criticize, but I think really his race there is with Piastri and not with Verstappen, and it's tough to judge because it's tough to seed position that early in the race, but really just not getting in a scrap there with Max on lap 1 a little bit and costing him a couple spots. I think that was his bigger issue there. As the race went on, it became a lot harder to catch up to Piastri from the position that he was in. It's tough to criticize. Certainly wasn't his worst weekend, but that's kind of the only nit I would pick, I guess.
Yeah, the thing is, in this championship between these 2 McLaren guys, I think you have to be in the lead after lap 1. That's how you're going to win these races, or at least beat your teammate in these races, barring some, safety car that leaves one guy out to dry and one guy gets advantage of it, or something crazy like that. In a normal race, I think you have to be leading out of lap 1 between the 2 McLaren guys, and then you could just use your pace from there to pick off anybody else that's in front of you. But that's really the thing, is you're kind of fighting your teammate here and not really the rest of the grid in that sense, right now at least. And I think, going back to that turn 2 thing here, I think that's really kind of where Lando lost the race this weekend. I know some people will say it was him taking so long to get past Oscar, and I think that certainly would have helped his chances, but I think, yes, he had more pace in the race. I think so, at least, than Oscar. But I don't think he was going to be allowed past his teammate once Piastri was ahead there. Granted, I don't know if they would have, I don't think it would have been an allowed situation. Like, I don't think it would have been team orders or anything. But when those guys, yes, Lando was quicker on pace, but it was, 1/10, 2/10 a lap maybe. Like, it was marginal, and that's how close it is between these 2 guys. And when you have, that small of an advantage, it's going to be really hard to pass in this era of car. I think Oscar would have been able to hold him off there. If, let's say that gap was 3 or 4 seconds when Lando got past, I still think Oscar would have been able to win the race just because he's in the same car. The pace isn't that much off, and he's out front in clean air. He's able to use that in an era of car where clean air is the key, and it's much easier to defend from there than it is to attack from behind. So yes, I think getting past a little quicker would have helped Lando, but at the end of the day, I don't think he's going to win from there once Oscar's ahead after the first lap. I think that's kind of how this championship is right now, and that's kind of the thing that has been killing Lando so far, is that he's just, it's either the starts or qualifying or something. He's not going to be ahead at the end of the first lap, and that's really the goal here, and that's really what I think Lando has to be solely focused on going forward, is just being the lead of the two McLarens at the end of that first lap, and then you can control the race from there with your an equal car and everything else.
Yeah, and that's kind of the point I was making. I think it's much more important on that first lap to play defense in that scenario, being second and Piastri being fourth. I mean, it almost doesn't matter that Verstappen is in the lead. I know that maybe McLaren didn't even know how much pace they had this weekend, and they were a little more concerned about Verstappen, but it was clear pretty early on in that race. We were watching it together. I said pretty early on that McLaren was going to be 1-2. I think Piastri was second at that point. Norris was fourth or fifth, just because they were just flying around the track. And I think realistically, like I said, that's what it comes down to at the end of the day. Even if you have to sit in second for a little bit, being able to take a step back and say, this is what I need to do for now, and this will put me in the best position to win. And that's just another kind of strategy, a moment as a driver where you got to kind of just focus on what your race is and who it's with, and kind of go from there.
Yeah, and that's one of those things where I think right now it's just Oscar has that IQ part down a little bit more, and Lando, I think, has just the overall pace a little bit more. And right now that advantage Oscar has is winning out in the end. So yeah, I think that's kind of where those two guys are at right now. And I saw somewhere too that it took equal laps for Oscar and Lando to overtake Max, which it didn't feel like that when we were watching. Like you said, we were watching it together, and I was just saying the whole time, Lando's got to get past here if he wants any chance. He's got to get past as quick as possible. And, like I said earlier, I think being ahead at the end of lap 1 was more important, but he still needed to get past a little bit quicker there. And I think that touches on some of the issues that Lando's having right now too, is overtaking when the guy, and I've talked about this before, the guy in front covers off the inside. It's just he's not taking advantage of a switchback or dummying and going outside back to inside. That seems like it's been really difficult for him so far. So yeah, I think that Norris still has some ways to go, but I think just on pace, like if you just had both those guys just laying down lap times for 20, 30 laps, I think Lando's slightly ahead. But Oscar's just, used what the races, how the races are coming to him, and he's using that to his advantage right now, and it's working really well. So not taking anything away from Oscar here, obviously what he's doing is working out great. So I just think it'll be really interesting to see how this battle continues throughout the rest of the year. It should be really, really exciting between these two. Yeah,
it will be. I mean, you made the point that it felt a lot longer for Lando. It felt like almost twice as long. I think a lot of that may have just been his strategy from behind. It seemed like there were a lot more aggressive attempts at passing, kind of back and forth between him and Verstappen, whereas Piastri, there certainly was a battle there, but maybe a little more composed and waiting for the moment to strike. And, that's just kind of the difference, like you said, between the two of them at the moment. Lando clearly has the pace. It's just a matter of, managing that in the car and, using their strategy, not even team strategy, just individual driver strategy in the moment. Like you said, driver IQ, kind of the difference right now.
Yeah, definitely. I'm 100% agreement. Let's move on to some stuff with Ferrari this weekend. Not their best weekend. Seemed to be way behind on pace. They were struggling to get past the Williams for a good majority of that race. They were way behind, and that whole time they were bickering on the radio about team orders and who should be allowed to go ahead and try and hunt down Albon. It was just a really tough weekend for them, and one that I think there's still a lot of growing to do in that team right now. Just with the car itself, it's really struggling and way behind on pace. But B, just that inner team play and that battle between those guys. I think that they're both, obviously Lewis knows who he is. So many world championships and been the dominant driver for so long, and Charles, obviously, I think he knows who he is as well, and he has been the lead guy at that team for so long. So I think those two guys are trying to kind of figure it out right now and really, tussle for that top spot, even if it's for like a P7 on the track like it was this weekend. And yeah, I just thought that, the team orders and the radio was really interesting and very, it was definitely great to listen to when we were watching the race. Some of the comments, especially from Hamilton, were, quite funny to us as we were watching, at least.
Yeah, that was some of the best team radios we've gotten in the last few years. I mean, I think it's just not a great overall situation. Both drivers are clearly frustrated with the overall shape of the team. You mentioned strategy, and that certainly hasn't been great. It obviously didn't work out this past weekend. They did get a little bit a mix of luck and good strategy with the sprint and putting Lewis on the podium there. They got a little bit lucky with the time they were able to box, but end up getting on the podium there. So not all an awful weekend from Ferrari, but I think, at the end of the day, even a bigger issue than the strategy is the pace of the car. I think, right now they're arguably the fifth best car on pace. The numbers I saw, I did have them in fifth, even behind the Williams on pure pace. And, so you've got to really look in the mirror at this point. And depending on how their 2026 development is looking, it'll be interesting to see what they do with the car from here. You don't want to waste a year with these two drivers, certainly. And, maybe this is it for them. They try and go for whatever they can get this year if the rumors are really true about Mercedes engine teams being dominant next year. But, yeah, we'll kind of see how that goes and how that develops. I'm hoping that I'm hoping they're good next year too, but I'm hoping they can at least make some kind of run for it this year, and we're not just stuck with these little glimmers like Hamilton winning the China sprint and everything. I'd like to see a real solid run from Ferrari at this point, like we did a couple times last year, but it seems so far away at the moment.
Yeah, it's Mercedes is definitely quicker right now. The Williams this weekend it had exceptional pace. So they were kind of just right there with Ferrari this weekend. Obviously, Red Bull with Max is quicker, and then the McLarens are in their whole other category right now. So yeah, in some aspects they are running around fourth to fifth just based on pace, and with the expectations that I think a lot of people had coming into this year, that's not good enough. And then on top of that, like you said, we have next year where the rumors are Mercedes have that great engine and should be like the front runners next year. And, it'd be a real shame if we just have these kind of years of Lewis and Charles just go by the wayside because that car is just not in the right place. So I really want Ferrari to get this figured out soon. Hopefully by the end of this year, maybe they'll be, fighting for some wins and some more podiums. But that's the thing is with these new regulations coming, how much are they going to want to, advance that car later this year when I think, we're already, like you said, only a quarter of the season in, but they're not going to win the constructors this year, and neither of their guys are going to win the drivers. So yeah, what do you want to do at that point? Do you want to waste a year of a great driver lineup that one of those guys is aging out, or do you want to, still try and go for it this year and maybe get a couple of wins at the end? It's really tough, and tough times and tough decisions right now to be had at Ferrari for sure.
Yeah, that's what I was going to say. Is there's some tough conversations to be had. I mean, if it goes down as these guys not winning, only winning a couple races maybe as a pairing and never getting close to a championship, that'll go down as really one of the greatest disappointments and greatest what ifs in F1 history, especially recent history. I mean, two drivers with their pedigree is very few teammate combos we've ever seen like that. So, I like you said, I just want to see them get it right. I'd love to have more insight as to how their development is going for 26, but of course we don't really know that. So, yeah, we'll see where they go from here. It's kind of shocking, like you said, how far they've fallen. They really should be, at least second, maybe third right now on pace. There's no excuse, certainly, to be behind Williams and, even Red Bull with all the turmoil in their team. I know they had a big head start, but they've lost all their momentum in the last year or so and, had problems with the second driver and with the leadership and everything else there. So, there's really no excuse at this point for the pace that they've shown, and hopefully we can, see them get it figured out soon.
For sure. I really hope Fred gets things right there because, I love the driver lineup. I love the team. I love Fred. I hope it all works out because right now it is going in a really bad direction, and Fred has been kind of downplaying it so far this year. And I think right now you have to kind of stare that in the face and say, kind of admit that there is a problem and something really big needs to change for that car, and so that we don't just get these glimmers, like you said, of good showings, of podiums, sprint wins, sprint podiums, that we see that more often. You have to take advantage of what you have right now in front of you with Leclerc and Hamilton, certainly. Just lastly here from F1 in Miami, I think we got to touch on Kimi Antonelli's weekend. Really promising weekend, just turned completely sour for him. Pole in the sprint race, undone in turn one. When Piastri was able to get up the inside and take the lead there, not too big of a deal. He could still have a good finish from there in the sprint, but unfortunately he goes to pit, gets contact with Max as they, unsafe release for Max there. Doesn't even get to go into his pit stall, so has to essentially do a drive-through penalty for no reason. Really sets him back very far in the pack. Not able to recover for much of anything there in the sprint, which was really a shame after that sprint pole lap. And then P3 on the grid, another great qualifying lap for Antonelli in the Grand Prix, turned to P6 due to the safety car timing there, where George was able to really take advantage of that between the two Mercedes, and Antonelli was kind of stuck behind. And then really had to just kind of hold off and fight those Williams back there. It was a real shame because I think we saw a lot of great from Antonelli this weekend. We kind of saw that promise and what we've all been, hoping for and waiting for, and which is really, really exciting. And then kind of just undone in both races. Really a shame. But I think that there's a lot of good to take from this weekend for Antonelli for sure. And, it's really exciting to have him start to kind of break through. And, he's still, obviously, he's really, really young. And, I wouldn't have blamed him if it took him a year to figure it out. So the fact that he's able to kind of start figuring it out right from the beginning, and then just in, his first 6 races to have a pole, albeit a sprint pole, but a pole nonetheless, was really incredible. And, I'm super excited, and there's a lot of good to take away despite kind of the, not as great finishes from the weekend, I'd say, in the races.
Yeah, I mean, this is maybe easier for me to say than it would be for him, someone who, was going through those races and kind of had to deal with a bit of disappointment this weekend. But I think he should take nothing but positives from this weekend. We saw the qualifying pace twice. He out-qualified Russell on both sessions, who's been one of the best drivers this season and one of the best drivers in the series for a few years now. Granted, he did get a little bit of help there, especially in the sprint qualifying. The strategy with Russell was a little bit confusing there with, sending him out so early with the track evolution. But regardless, 2 phenomenal laps from Antonelli, and I really think that he's been one of the standout drivers of the season, just given being a rookie and being such a young rookie at that, with a little less experience in the junior formulas than a lot of other guys, maybe, just kind of getting thrown into this position and being able to deliver the way he did was all season has been phenomenal. It's been very good pretty much every weekend, but this weekend, obviously, you most clearly saw the talent there, and I think, we thought it was possible for a while, but now I think it's inevitable at some point that he ends up on a podium this year and maybe even wins a race.
Yeah, I'm loving what I'm seeing of Antonelli. Really, Antonelli and Behrman are the two, rookies. I think Hadjar as well. It needs to be included in that, but I'm loving what I'm seeing, especially from Antonelli and Behrman so far this year. Not Behrman's best day, but between those two guys and Hadjar as well, I think that there's a ton to take away from these rookies so far, and it's been really exciting to see both these guys, and I'm even more excited for the future with these two, and Hadjar as well, and even some of the other rookies that I haven't mentioned yet. Just continuing to grow and really expand into their careers, and with Antonelli and Behrman and even Hadjar, I think we have three guys that could, really take some big steps here in the coming years and kind of put their foot down and take a step forward in these championships and take a hold of the future as the next generation. So super exciting from Antonelli. I think from this weekend, like you said, I would only take away positives if I were him. Let's go to our personal podiums now for Miami. And first, I have Oscar Piastri. I think we touched on him already at the top, but great drive from him, and just the IQ right now, and being able to take advantage of what's coming his way has been really beneficial for him, and now holds a decent margin in the championship lead and 4 race wins compared to his teammates 1 through the first 6 races. And second, I had Alex Albon. We haven't touched on him yet, but a really, really good finish for him in that Williams. And the Williams, the guys on F1 TV were just gushing at the Williams pace all day. At all Grand Prix, it was really fun to watch those guys. I think Carlos could have maybe gotten a little bit better of a finish if it weren't for the VSC going back to green. At a really kind of poor time for him down the back straight with both Ferraris right behind him. But other than that, I think for Albon at least it was a great weekend. And Williams as a whole, super exciting for those guys. I think that there's a lot of, we've already seen a lot from both of them and Williams as a whole this season, but they're definitely that 5th best team by far. And I know Haas was, in the lead early in that battle, but I don't think it's going to be much of a battle once we get to the end of this championship here. And then in third, I have Lando Norris. Like I said, I think he still had the raw pace this weekend to be just as good, if not better, than what Piastri was putting down. And I don't hate what happened in turn 2 either. I don't really put blame on him. I think that's just an early, or lap 1 kind of battle that, he just got caught out on the wrong side of. And, if it's anywhere else on the track, he might be able to just hop back on and come back in P2 or P3. But unfortunately there, kind of had to go over some big curbs and, drops back to P6. So I think it was a good weekend from all of these guys. But and we didn't really have any too big of stinkers this week, I'd say. But I think Piastri, Albon, and Norris were the 3 standouts.
Yeah, I was going to say, I found this one of the toughest weekends we've ever had to do as far as F1 for both the podium and the stinker, because there was a lot of guys who had one really good session and then maybe struggled in the other session between the feature race and the sprint race. We had guys like Hamilton and Stroll get phenomenal results in the sprint race, and then whether through their own fault or through the cars or whatnot, they struggled through the main race. And then we saw guys do great in the main race and struggle Friday or Saturday. I think a couple guys to start that, have to be on here. Like you said, Piastri, P1, same as you, just winning another race, 4 on the season, 3 in a row. Really extending that championship lead. If it wasn't for that Australia crash, I guess, this could be a totally different ball game right now as far as looking at this championship. So Lando's still hanging on for now, but Oscar really being the dominant driver there at the moment. Albon in second, just a phenomenal drive from him. I think there's a really good argument that he should be first, honestly, on these podiums. I've kept him second for now, but he was so good this weekend. And the Williams car is a lot better, but Albon has been driving phenomenally. Another one that had a great weekend, but has also had a great year on the whole as well. I found it really, really hard to do this third spot. I'll just stick with what you did as well and go with Lando Norris, because he did win the sprint race and came P2 in the main race. So, it could do a lot worse than that. And he did show a lot of pace, make up a lot of ground on Piastri. I really wanted to go with Antonelli here for this spot, just from what we saw from him in qualifying and whatnot. It's a little tough to give that spot, just given both the races were pretty difficult for him, but regardless, still a phenomenal weekend for him. And it's right there for me that third spot was really hard this week.
Yeah, I think the only other guy that I could think of there, other than Antonelli and who I had with Norris, would be Verstappen. Just how he was able to battle both of those McLaren guys for as long as he did, I think was really incredible stuff. And obviously we know his driving capabilities, but just when you see stuff like that, you just get reminded of it, and it's on full display again. I kind of got unlucky with the safety car timing as well, put him behind Russell and wasn't able to get back past in the end and get back on the podium, which I think he probably deserved, just with how he was handling those first 20 or so laps with the McLaren guys. But yeah, that's the only other guy that I could think of for that last podium spot. As for stinker of the week, I have Liam Lawson. His first chance for points in the sprint race undone by a penalty. He got into the side of Alonso fighting for that 8th spot. Then had a tough quali with battery issues, I believe, something with that car he was complaining about. And then had to retire in the race due to car damage, which, to be fair, wasn't his fault. Duan kind of got into the side of him in that first turn, which opened up a hole in the side pod, and that car just had zero pace from there. But still really tough for him with everything else he's been through this year. I think he's I still think he's a good driver, and I think I stand by that he has a lot of talent and that he can be an F1 driver for sure. Just things are just not breaking his way so far this year, and I think he just needs one thing to kind of go his way, and that'll kickstart him back to, hopefully fighting with Hadjar at least for the rest of the season in that inter-team battle at Racing Bulls. So tough weekend for Lawson. Not all of it his fault, some of it his, but just with everything so far this year, he needed those sprint points, and kind of throwing that away with a bad move on Alonso. Tough to see there.
Yeah, in my opinion, the two guys who needed a good weekend more than anyone were Lawson and Duan, and they both fell well short this weekend. Granted, both of their weekends, were big struggles, but not everything that happened for either one of them was fully their fault. Some of it was their own, and some of it was outside of their control. Because of that, like you said earlier, I don't think there was really a perfect week or a perfect pick this weekend for stinker of the week. So because of that, I've just gone with Ferrari as a team here. We already did a whole thing on Ferrari, so I won't belabor it too much, but 5th on pace, and they did get the Hamilton sprint podium, but like I said earlier, a little bit of that was luck with the safety car timing, and at the end of the day, this just was one of their worst performances yet, of recent times when it comes to pace of the car, and also just on the radio chatter and clear frustration from both drivers. And yeah, it's time for some real self-examination there. So yeah, I just went with Ferrari this week.
Yeah, I think that's a completely fair pick. And yeah, we already touched on Ferrari, like you said, but there's a lot to be had there, and like we said, some tough discussions and tough decisions to be made going forward there for sure on what they want to do the rest of this year and the future. And I think this weekend just kind of highlighted all that for them. Let's move to NASCAR at Texas now, where Joey Logano wins a Wreckfest. What a surprise in Texas, as he kept his Penske Ford clean all day, moving from 27th to 1st, as the reigning champion gets his first win of the season and his first win of his first top 5 as well of 2025. Kind of the thing that Joey does, I feel like he wins a lot of these Wreckfest races where he just, squeaks it out and manages to keep it clean when, everybody else doesn't, and gets the win. And that's what we saw here this weekend. Once again, still a great drive going from 27th to 1st, not taking anything away there. Just, I feel like he wins a lot of these races. So I think that's worth just pointing out that he kind of wins another Wreckfest here in Texas.
Yeah, this was quite a race to catch up on after the fact. I mean, just kind of all over the place, lots of action. One of those races where there's lots of action, but also, that's not always a good thing. Sometimes, you get the restart, run a couple laps, wreck, repeat that cycle, and that's not always fun to watch. But, at the end of the day, those kinds of races are the ones where the best drivers a lot of times win, and the veteran drivers do. And, Joey Logano fits both of those to a T. I mean, a guy who just comes in, and can thrive in the chaos like this, and kind of steal a win like this. Not that he was bad; he had a good day overall, but he was never the dominant car of the day. Just kind of put himself in position at the end, and maybe got a little bit of luck his way, but a lot of skill got him to that point as well.
Yeah, like you mentioned, moving its way up to, around, the 15s, around the top 10 for a good portion of the second half of that race, and then just taking advantage of all those restarts and doing a good job there. Not taking anything away from Logano here. I thought it was like you were kind of saying, a great race from him, and one where definitely, he didn't luck into the win by any means, but yeah, it just was a solid race from him. Like you said, he wasn't the dominant driver of the day. Maybe a couple other guys you could say deserved the win more, but that's, you have to race out the whole race. That's why there's as many laps as there is, and you don't give the winner to the guy who leads the most laps throughout the day or has the best average position throughout the whole day. You give it to the guy who crosses the finish line first, and Logano was able to do that this week. And yeah, just another time Logano is, able to do just that. So it's kind of like a knack and a skill he has for it, honestly, at this point, winning races like this. And yeah, it's been a tough start for the year for Joey, especially after last week. He was disqualified after the race, which was going to be his first top 5 of the year, and then comes here and gets that and a little bit more. So a good weekend of redemption for him as well. And yeah, I thought it was a very solid drive from Logano, albeit with the Wreckfest fashion that the race was.
Yeah, I mean, look, it was just one of those days. Yeah, there was a lot of guys that wrecked out, and there was a lot of guys in that 20 to 30 range started the race down there in the 20s and 30s that made big comebacks. But a guy like Joey's going to know his way to navigate through that, and a team like Penske as well. Logano coming in first, of course, Blaney in third, and then Austin Cindric didn't have the best finish, but he did have a great day. Led a lot of laps, 60 laps, I believe. Finishes down in 25th, but still a phenomenal day for Penske, and one of those days a team like them is going to be able to capitalize on, with their experience and with their championship pedigree. So, yeah, it doesn't surprise me at all to see them in the winner's circle in a race like this.
Yeah, a good couple of weeks for Penske here, the win at Talladega and then getting the win at Texas as well. I think kind of the other guy that had the best chance to win, I think, was Kyle Larson. got a poor restart with around 25 to go that I think cost him the win, to be honest. Blaney was way behind Larson on that restart, and Reddick was, right up on the bumper of McDowell on the outside, and gave McDowell that push on the outside to the lead. Larson from there just wasn't really able to recover, lost a few positions in the dirty air that these next gen cars create. And from there, he was just kind of stuck around fourth, fifth the rest of the race through the last couple of restarts. And yeah, I think that this was probably a race that Larson should have won, leading the most laps. And just, I think he should have probably took advantage of it, albeit I don't know how much of that restart that he kind of muffed there was his fault, or if it was more Reddick got a good push on McDowell, and McDowell used that. And Blaney, he was having struggles on the restarts all day, so it was kind of unlucky, I guess, in a way for Larson to have Blaney right behind him. And yeah, probably a race Larson still should have won. After winning the Xfinity race the day before as well, I thought he was the best driver out there all day, other than maybe Reddick. Reddick had a really good car, just didn't get it to the front ever. So yeah, those are probably the two other guys that I think probably should have won the race. Ultimately, neither of them capitalized, and yeah, it's probably a shame for Larson, and probably more so for Reddick, actually, because he doesn't have a win yet, and it'd be really good for him to get one on the board and secure a spot in the playoffs.
Yeah, I mean, I thought this was going to be a big weekend for Reddick, and it almost was, so I don't feel too bad about thinking that beforehand. Of course, we all expected a lot from Larson here as well. I still think he ran a really, really good race. One restart in a race with a lot of them doesn't really change that. It certainly not his best work, obviously, but yeah, I don't think it changes the fact that Larson ran a really good race. Just kind of a one little mishap there probably cost him the win, like you said. But at the end of the day, still a top five for Hendrick, and Larson's a guy that's already in the playoffs. So, I'm sure he's disappointed, but he's probably not going to lose too much sleep over it. At the end of the day, he'll still be fine, and still comes home with a great result here for him and the team.
Yeah, one other guy I wanted to touch on here, Carson Hocevar. He had a great day going, starting on pole, and kind of riding out front for that first little bit when he had the clean air, and eventually kind of lost it a little bit. Still was running around the top five though, and then had some other things go wrong, and ultimately got caught up in one of those accidents. Somehow they were able to get that car back out on track. I don't know how, with how sideways it was. And he was only a few laps down. But, yeah, just kind of a great day gone wrong for him when it looked like he was on for at least a top 10 finish, certainly, if not, higher in the top 5, or maybe even a win with how good that car seemed. So I still think we're seeing a lot of good things from Hocevar here. And I'm really thrilled to watch how this goes forward for Hocevar with what we've seen so far this year. It's been kind of a down couple of weeks for him, to be honest, just not showing up as much with the performances as he was the first few races, but definitely put himself back on the map here. So I thought it was still a good weekend for Hocevar, not the result he wanted, but definitely good to see just him getting out there and doing good things up front for a guy that we think has a ton of talent in this series.
Yeah, he absolutely has a ton of talent, and I know that he's not everyone's cup of tea as a driver, but I think it's really exciting when he's up there fighting for race wins and top 5, top 10 finishes. I think that he's one of the most entertaining guys that we have now in the series. I know that he can be a little reckless sometimes, and from a safety perspective, that's certainly not a great thing, but it's definitely entertaining as a fan to see him up there at the top. So yeah, he'll be back at not the ending that he wanted today, but at the end of the day, is a young guy with a lot in front of him, and the talent's clearly there, especially at these super speedways. We've seen some good stuff from him, and in these mile and a halves as well. He's got a lot of chops for a young guy, and will be back, I'm sure, very soon.
Yeah, I think, like you said, a lot of good to take for Hocevar from this weekend. So he'll definitely be back and fighting up there again. I'm hoping he gets his first win here soon. I think he has the talent. Obviously, the Spire car is not the best on the grid, but also they've improved a little bit, and obviously given him a car good enough for pole. So he can use that hopefully coming up here and possibly get his first win this year, or maybe in the next year or two. Another thing here from Texas I want to ask is kind of that Jeff Gluck pole is, was Texas a good race? To me, it was, and I enjoyed it, albeit, kind of the Wreckfest that it was, but I thought there were a lot of exciting moments, some really good racing. Some parts where it was a little bit dull, more towards the beginning, not a lot of guys passing, a lot of single file stuff. And it's not the best mile and a half by any means. I think, where we're going next week, Kansas is probably better and will produce a better overall race, but I still think Texas is, a solid track, and I don't think it's bad enough where we need to do a complete overhaul of the place and start fresh. I would worry that would kind of, cause some issues going forward at that place. I think it's, it's getting a little bit better. I would think every year during this next gen era. So yeah, I think, obviously it's still not the best race by any means, but I would say it was a good race and better than what a lot of people expected coming into the week, and what they do expect every time we visit Texas.
Yeah, I mean, I think if this is a simple yes or no like the poll is, then it's definitely a yes. I think that it may not be a 10 out of 10 yes, a slam dunk, and I understand those who say that it was a wreck fest, but I think the baseline for intermediate racing with this package is still really good. So even the intermediate races that aren't the best, we're still getting some great action. And like you said, I think Kansas next week will be really good for the series. And I would certainly give this one a yes. And Texas used to be one of my least favorite tracks, I think, on the calendar, when baseline, or the intermediate racing was just a lot. It just wasn't nearly as fun as it is now with the last package. But now we're at a point where all these intermediate tracks look so good. And I still get excited now for a track like Texas or a track like Kansas next week.
Yeah, definitely. I agree that the intermediates are definitely the best that this package is producing by far. Lastly, before we move to our personal top 3 and stinker of the week, I just wanted to give credit to Fox here. We all bashed on them pretty hard last week, to finishing that race with going to 2 commercials under 20 to go, 1 with 9 to go, not coming back till 5 laps left. We went over that a lot last week, and how difficult that was to watch. But this week, I got to give them credit. They finished out the race with no commercial breaks in the last 45 laps, and that was a long 45 laps, especially with all the wrecks and the accidents that were in there. I wouldn't have been mad if they went to commercial a couple times during those yellow flag segments, but they kept it green, or they kept it, commercial free the whole time, and I thought that was fantastic. Essentially that whole last hour was commercial free, and that was really awesome. I thought it helped to set up the ending. I thought the broadcast just ran a lot smoother. It was great to see. So I got to shout out Fox there. We call them out when they're bad, and last week was, but this week at Texas, I thought it was great. Obviously there's still little things here and there throughout the broadcast, but in terms of the commercial stuff here, I thought that ending was as good as it gets. And, if they can do it this weekend, I don't see why they can't do it other weekends and do it more going forward. So, yeah, just got to give Fox a shout out there, and hopefully this is something that we see more of in the coming weeks and coming races.
Yeah, I mean, there have been many weeks we've called them out for their struggles. So it's absolutely due to come back this week and say that this was a big comeback week for Fox. I think that last week really may have been a turning point for a lot of people. There was clearly a lot of outrage regarding those cautions so late, or those commercials, so late in the race. And yeah, I think maybe this was a turning point even for the higher ups in NASCAR to kind of hear the people's complaints finally and go over that with Fox and make it clear that commercials that late in the race wouldn't be tolerated. I guess we'll see a sort of how this plays out till the end of Fox's run with NASCAR this season, see if this was a one-time change and we kind of just got lucky, or if it was a permanent thing. Certainly, I think it was intentional. They want to try and squeeze in as many commercials as they can. So at the end of the day, that's what they're going to do. But for them to hold off in this situation, I think it really shows, that they're listening, and that hopefully this is something that they'll continue to do going forward.
Yeah, I think it was just great from them, and like you said, it shows that they're listening. I think that's the big thing, and hopefully that's something that we take going forward. Obviously, Fox getting kind of towards the end of their coverage here this NASCAR season. That'll change at the Coke 600, but nonetheless, I think it's a great sign for things going forward. Maybe we'll get some of this, as we move forward here. Hopefully, I'm not getting my hopes too high. It just wasn't one race where it managed to go this way. But like I said, if they can do it here, I think that they could probably do it at most, if not all races. So I would hope that kind of thing continues here for NASCAR on Fox. Let's move to our personal top three. Number one, I have Joey Logano. We already touched on him at the top. In second, I have Ross Chastain, started 31st and finished second. Kind of called out Trackhouse as well in his post-race interview for their lack of qualifying performance this year. That was a bit surprising, in my opinion, coming from Chastain. I feel like I've never heard him say anything bad about Trackhouse or his cars, but also it's warranted because, he's had one top 5 and 2 top 10s in his last 4 races, and he started those races in 25th, 35th, 32nd, and 31st. So, I think it's very warranted for him to call out their lack of quality pace with those, those finishes, with also those starting positions. I think Chastain's kind of had a little bit of an underrated year in that aspect, just with the fact that that car has been nowhere close on qualifying, and he still managed to get a lot of top 10s and keep that car clean, which, for Chastain a few years ago would have been kind of difficult. But I think that he's been really, really good this year, just given the car that they've had at Trackhouse. And then in third, I had Eric Jones, finished 5th, but it's their first non-drafting track top 5 finish in, a while. I think they said, or Eric Jones said, since 2022 or 2023. So it was good to see Legacy have some real speed, both out of Jones and, John Hunter Nemechek was up there around the top 10 as well. So I thought it was a good week for Legacy as a whole, but especially Eric Jones finishing that race out in 5th was a good sign. Hopefully that Legacy is kind of getting their legs back under them and moving in a good direction after a really poor couple of years here.
Yeah, absolutely. I was just a little bit late. I thought they would have a nice run at Talladega, and instead Legacy comes out and has a nice run this past week at Texas instead. I've got a little similar podium, but I've gone a little bit off on my third one. I've got Logano and Chastain first and second as well. We already talked about Logano. Just ran a really, really solid race, and turned out that, given the conditions and given what happened to everyone else in this race, that was enough for a win this week. So credit to him. Chastain I've put in second as well. I kind of, Trackhouse's struggles, I think, had flown under the radar a little bit for me this season because, I saw Chastain still having solid performances, of course, and solid finishes, and, saw some moments from Suarez as well. And SVG is still going through that learning curve. So, for me, I hadn't really had that front of mind, but it's absolutely warranted Chastain at least expressing his frustration with the team, because clearly with that kind of race pace, if the qualifying pace could be a little bit better, they could be winning races and be, like I thought at the start of the year, be a multi-car playoff team. And then my third, I've gone with Kyle Larson. Like we mentioned, loses out on this race in the end, but he still ran the most laps in the lead and the most laps in the top 5 of this race. Qualified up in 4th, finished in 4th, which is not his most amazing day qualifying or finishing the same spot he qualified, but he still ran a great race. And being so good for so much of that race and still finishing in the top 5, I went ahead and gave him my last spot. I will say, too, I got to shout out Ricky Stenhouse, just as a guy that, another guy that, sometimes we talk about when he struggles, but came out and finished 6th in this race, coming all the way back from 34th, and that machinery is very impressive. So, there's a few guys like that. Nemechek in 8th as well. A few guys that we don't normally see in the top 10 popping up there this week.
Yeah, I have, I like a lot of those guys as well. It was hard to make this top 3 because I think a lot of guys had pretty good weeks. And a lot of guys that we don't usually see up there as well in the top 10. So it was a tough list for sure. My stinker of the week is Josh Berry. Spun and crashed from the lead by himself. He and that 21 team, that car had so much speed this weekend and were on for a great finish, if not, even a win. So it could have been, a continuation of a great year for Berry in the 21. Unfortunately, they crash out and don't get much out of the day. But I still think overall there's a lot of positives to take away. That 21 car right now in the mile and a half especially, but really everywhere has been great this season. And I'm loving what I'm seeing from Berry as well. So, yeah, it's good to see the Wood Brothers car back up there fighting for wins and good finishes, on merit alone, on pace. But this week, it was a tough look for Berry to crash out there. A lot of guys had trouble on that, bump in turn 3 and turn 4. But, to crash out there from the lead was not a great look, and tough for Berry there when he was out in the lead and kind of setting the pace in that race.
Yeah, I think that's a good pick, and I'm going to go with another guy that fell victim to that turn 3-4 bump there, and that's Kyle Busch. Was in 3rd in this race, with a chance of winning, and finally breaking the drought. Even if he didn't win, a top 5 would have gone a long way for him and for the team, I'm sure. Ends up coming in 20th, but of course has that solo wreck with 39 laps to go, just sort of spinning on that bump there in 3 and 4, and then not his fault, but getting involved in another wreck after that as well. So, yeah, just once again, not Kyle Busch's day. And, it's tough with that bump. It's not the worst mistake a driver can make, but just another disappointing end of the race for Kyle Busch.
Yeah, I think it was tough for Kyle Busch especially. He kind of got the commentator's curse there from Harvick. He was just talking about how such a good day he was having, and then immediately hits that bump and spins out. Good recovery from him, though, to still have a decent finish. But, yeah, it was tough for Busch there when he could have had a lot better finish. Let's move to IndyCar here as the last series where Alex Palou, surprise, wins from pole, leading 81 of the 90 laps in the most dominant victory I think we've seen yet this season in IndyCar. This is Palou's 3rd win in 4 races this season. He extends his championship lead now to 60 over Christian Lundgaard. And, we got to ask the question again, but can anyone stop Palou this season? To me, it seems unlikely given the dominance we've seen from him so far. It's not over yet, though, because we haven't gotten into any ovals yet, and that's his weakest link as a driver. The good news for Palou, though, is that the guys who are great on ovals are pretty far behind in points right now. You look at, to me, three of the best IndyCar drivers on ovals. Pato O'Ward, 88 points behind. Scott McLaughlin, 91 points behind. And Joseph Newgarden, the king of ovals, 118 points behind. So, if one of those guys can win the Indy 500 and have a great, and have a great day, and Palou has a bad day at the Indy 500 with the double points there, things could change in that championship battle. But other than that, I think it's going to take a lot of bad luck for Palou to lose this championship, which is crazy to say after 4 races, but that's just the way it is right now in IndyCar. It's kind of Alex Palou's world, and we're all just living in it and watching it happen.
Yeah, I mean, I picked Palou to win before the season, and I certainly don't feel bad about that pick now. 3 out of 4 wins and a podium in the one race he didn't win. And I picked him not to finish on the podium, of course, in our bold prediction for this week, which I knew was a mistake once he put it on pole. I knew that there was no way he was not finishing in the top 3 at that point unless he got spun out, which obviously did not happen. So, yeah, I just don't think anybody's stopping him. I do think it'll get closer, like you mentioned, some ovals coming up. I don't expect him to win the Indy 500 or some of those other oval races, but I just don't think it'll be enough for anyone to catch up. We've still got some road courses too on the calendar, and he's usually good enough on the ovals. Still a lot of top 5s, top 10s. That with this lead he's built, I just don't see anyone coming back at this point.
Yeah, I think it's getting out of reach, out of hand pretty quickly here for the rest of the field. It kind of bars the question, should Palou be looked at more for an F1 seat soon? I think with everything that we've seen the past few years from him, how dominant he's been, how consistent he's been, obviously you don't have to worry about the ovals in F1. That's not an issue. And he's still a very young guy. I think that there's a lot to look for and a lot to like from Palou if you're one of those big, if you're one of those F1 teams. On top of that, I think his buyout for an F1 seat is pretty low, pretty easy out of Ganassi for him. So yeah, I think that there's a lot of factors and signs pointing to Palou would be a great fit for an F1 seat soon. Obviously, we have Cadillac coming in, a new team. Palou, not an American, but he's been racing in IndyCar, which is almost only in the U.S. other than one race in Canada for a while now. So he might have some good relationships over here that he's built up that could provide well for him as he. If he wants to go to F1, there's also going to be plenty of there's going to be other seats that open up as well on the F1 grid with other teams. But the Cadillac one is the most obvious because there's going to be 2 free seats next year that aren't being taken up by anyone right now and are kind of it's kind of an open test for anyone that wants that seat right now. And I don't think you have to look much further than Palou as some guy who is definitely up to the task and has been one of the best top 5 drivers certainly in the world for the last 2, 3, 4 years.
Yeah, to me this is much more a question of if Alex Palou wants the seat than if he deserves it. He absolutely deserves it. Staring down the barrel of his 4th IndyCar championship in 5 years, and so much of those championships have come from his dominance on road and street courses. I think this is, I know that he's 28, not an ideal age to come into F1. Some teams may not want to take a chance on a guy like that because he's not a veteran presence in an F1 sense, and he's also not a rookie in many ways. We saw De Vries come in at an older age and really struggle, but I think Palou is such a talent. I think, there's no doubt in my mind that he's, like you said, he's well within the top 20 drivers in the world. So this should not be a question of whether or not Palou is qualified. It should be, does he want this seat? And Cadillac or whoever has an open seat. Really, I get if maybe a top F1 team doesn't want to take a chance on him being a new guy in the series, but any midfield team, bottom team, or Cadillac should be, gnawing at the bit to get this guy. And even if it's just for a few years, it's automatic to me.
Yeah, and another thing for Palou is he has, like you said, if he wins this championship, it's 4 championships in 5 years. The only other thing for him to accomplish in IndyCar at that point is winning the Indy 500, and if he wins that this year, I don't think there's anything left for him to hold him back and say, I really need to stay in IndyCar and see this out. Obviously he could go for the record of number of championships. He could go for more Indy 500 wins, but I don't think he needs to do that. I think he's already cemented his legacy in IndyCar for sure. Winning the Indy 500 would be huge for that. But even without that, I think he has, a legacy of his own that he's built. Even if he doesn't win the championship this year, 3 championships in 5 years, so many wins, so many top 5, so many podiums. I mean, the list is endless for what he's accomplished in IndyCar, other than that Indy 500, which obviously is something that you want to win if you're an IndyCar driver. If you're any race car driver, I think you want to win the Indy 500. But I don't think he has anything left to prove in IndyCar. If he wants to go to F1, even without winning the Indy 500, I don't think there's going to be any what-ifs of, what he could have done the rest of his IndyCar career. I think we pretty much already know how that's going to go for however long he wants to stay in IndyCar.
Yeah, and I think, too, if you look at it, I mean, he could go chase A.J. Foyt's 7 titles or Scott Dixon sort of having the modern record, I guess, with 6 titles. He could go chase those, or he could chase down the Indy 500, but maybe he does. Maybe he just wants to stay in IndyCar, and I wouldn't begrudge him for wanting to do that. It's a fantastic series, and he's the star of the series at the moment. But if there's part of him that wants to go chase that F1 dream, especially being an international driver from Spain, I think this is the moment and this is the opportunity. And it all comes down to whether or not. Whether it's something he wants and whether or not someone is willing to give him that chance. But I think at the end of the day, like I said, it should come down to what he wants, and there should be no team that is no team that will likely have seats open this offseason that is not willing to give him that opportunity.
Yeah, I 100% agree. I think anybody that has an open seat in F1 should be at least giving Alex Palou a call and seeing how that conversation goes, because what he's done, I know it's a different car, I know it's not exactly the same, but what he's done over here has been nothing short of incredible, and maybe the most dominant run we've seen in any motorsport in a while. Obviously, we have Max winning 4 straight F1 championships. He's been so incredibly dominant over in F1. But really, other than him, I mean, you don't have to look any farther other than Palou, of a guy who has dominated a series and has, really just been incredible every single race. He's up there. He's fighting for the win. He's not making crazy mistakes. He doesn't even have, bad luck. That's the crazy thing, is he doesn't have a time where he gets a flat tire. He doesn't have a time where his engine fails on him. It's just crazy that he's just able to be so consistent and avoid every single obstacle that gets in his way. And if I know, like you said, he is a bit on the older side, I guess, for going into F1 for his first time. But I still think he's a really young guy, and I think that there's a lot of talent there, obviously. So if you're Cadillac, if you're one of these F1 teams that's going to have an open seat in the near future, I would not look past Alex Palou in the slightest at all of being able to fill that seat and do well, pretty quickly, in my opinion.
Yeah, and another thing too, we always talk about with Palou is his consistency. A guy that's going to come in, week out, and give you top 5 finishes. I mean, that even if it's not your typical veteran, your prototypical F1 veteran, that's what every team is going to want. So, yeah, I mean, we've said all this needs to be said about this. It should be a slam dunk if anyone has a seat available, and that's what Alex wants.
Yeah, definitely. Another guy who has had a great weekend, a great run of weekends, has been Christian Lundgaard. He continued his great season here with another podium finish after starting seventh. That was my kind of, my one bold prediction for the weekend was Lundgaard getting his third straight podium. He was able to do that. I don't think it was super bold, but three straight podiums is very difficult in IndyCar just because of how many good drivers there are. But Lundgaard has been kind of the standout this year, in the non-Alex Palou category. And he's second in the championship in his first season with McLaren right now. I think he's been great. And I'm very interested to see how he does the rest of the season. And once we get to ovals, and really the battle between him and Pato O'Ward for that top McLaren spot, I think is going to be one to really keep an eye on, and kind of who's able to keep control and take control of that team is one of the big storylines right now.
Yeah, I'm certainly not counting Pato out yet, but it really looks at the moment like Lundgaard is the sharper of the two drivers. It's easy to say this when he's second in the standings, but he really has been, the second best driver this year, bar Alex Palou. He's been standout all season long, and for McLaren, who's usually, maybe third or fourth on pace, with that equipment to come in and be second in the standings and put together so many solid weekends in a row. This is a guy that I think if he continues on this form, it could be one of the stars of the series for the next few years here. Looks like this could be a big season for McLaren with two drivers in the top four right now, him and Pato, and we know how good Pato can be at Indy. So, there's potential here for a big season for Arrow McLaren to go along with their big F1 season, and Lundgaard especially has been, the signing of the offseason as far as bringing a new driver in to a new team's been unbelievable.
Yeah, I thought Lundgaard would be good. I didn't think he'd be this good this quickly. For Arrow McLaren, and like you said, for that team with Pato, he's been having a pretty good season himself. He's been a great driver so far, and then we get to the ovals where O'Ward is, I think, going to be the better of the two between him and Lundgaard. That team battle should be great as well to watch, and who's able to keep control of that McLaren team out front. Maybe one of those two guys can still fight for the championship. It's going to be really hard, like we said, with Palou doing what he's doing, but at least for fighting for P2, those two guys definitely have a great shot at it going forward. Another thing I wanted to do, shout out to Fox again for adding the Delta times during the qualifying coverage this week in IndyCar. I thought that was huge, and that's been missing for the first few broadcasts here. I didn't think it'd be too long before we saw it, just because everywhere else you see that, and it's really additive to the coverage. So I thought it was incredibly helpful during quali that we got it. NBC had it, F1 has it for their qualifying sessions, and I thought it was a great addition. So I wanted to shout out Fox for getting that in. It probably should have been here to start the season, but they're still learning, they're still growing, and I think every week that Fox broadcast is getting a little bit better, and everyone's getting a little bit more comfortable, and they're adding stuff and that needs to be added. They're taking away some stuff that does need to be taken away. So just wanted to shout out Fox again. Big week for Fox. Maybe they're on top of the personal podium for all three series for this week. They're not covering F1, but they were pretty good this week, and I got to give credit to them where credit's due.
Yeah, absolutely. Really strong weekend for them. Since the race ended, we've got the ratings in, and they're up a good bit. Looks like about 15-20% from what this race was last year, and it was on NBC. It wasn't a USA Network race or something like that. So it seems to me, it's not ratings aren't totally blowing the doors off, but it's a really good start for Fox. They've been a little up and down this year, but certainly still really good stuff from them. And I think that there's maybe some excitement starting to come back around that again, this Fox coverage with IndyCar. So, yeah, great stuff there.
Yeah, I think another thing too is not going up directly against NASCAR on another Fox channel is huge. I don't know why they ever go up against each other. I think that's obviously going to help the ratings out a ton when your two big series that are mainly focused in the U.S. Are going at the same time. That's going to be tough for viewers to decide which one they want to tune into. And it's going to take away from probably what the max we would see from both. So, especially while they're both under Fox, I think they need to. One race always needs to lead into the other, and that'll really help out ratings for both series. But yeah, like you said, very good to see the ratings are up, and I think people are going to be very interested in what IndyCar has to offer as we go forward here, because it is really such a good series, and the racing is incredible. And I think a lot of people are starting to catch on to that more and more these past couple of years. So I think it's all positives on that side of things.
Yeah, and I got to say, too, they were smart as well not to go up against F1. I know that was not on their network, like you mentioned, but, they ran their race before NASCAR and F1 on Sunday, and really kind of got that time period to its own. Like I mentioned earlier, I watched the NASCAR race a little bit later because it was on at the same time as F1, whereas IndyCar I got to watch live because it was on, 2 hours before either one of those races, or started 2 hours before. So, yeah, credit to IndyCar nailing the time slot there and the broadcast as well.
Yeah, let's move to our personal podiums here to close out. In first, I have Alex Palou. I mean, we got through everything that there is to talk about Palou. We've talked about it many times, but he just continues to be so dominant and so just in tune with that car, and everything is going his way right now. So I thought it was a great drive from him. Second, Christian Lundgaard. We touched on him a little bit as well. I think what he's done to start the season has been, nothing short of incredible. And as he just continues to grow with that McLaren team, I think it's only going to get better and better from here. So a lot to look forward to there. And then in third, I have Rinus VeeKay. It was a great day from him and for the Dale Coyne, guys to start fifth, finish fourth. They battled with the Penske guys, with the McLaren guys around all day, and got the better of some of those battles as well. So I think VeeKay looked great. The Dale Coyne team, probably one of their best finishes in quite some time, at least on a road course, certainly. And yeah, I thought VeeKay was very good as well. So, it was a good podium here. I think all these three guys definitely deserved it and put in great performances all day at Barber.
Yeah, I mean, like I talked about earlier, F1 podium and even the NASCAR top three being pretty hard to decide. This was really a slam dunk for me personally, going with the same three drivers that you did. I know that's a little bit boring, but it was just too easy this week. Palou being the dominant driver of the weekend, pole win, the whole 9 yards. Lundgaard coming in that second spot, and just another phenomenal result from him. We already been over it, but not much more he could have done. Like you said earlier, kind of winning the non-Alex Palou class there of the series, and then VeeKay coming in third on my podium and fourth overall. I read that this was their first top four in a couple years. Their best finish last year was all the way back in 13th. So incredibly impressive from Rinus in that Dale Coyne car to come out and put it in the top five. One of the best performances of the season so far, I think. So yeah, this was a slam dunk easy 1, 2, 3 for me.
Yeah. Lastly here for Stinker of the Week, I had Marcus Ericsson, but I'm going to change it to just Andretti as a whole. I think Colton Herta was running a good race. Was it up in third? Had another issue on a pit stop that has just been plaguing him all year. Still had a solid day, but I think it could have been a lot better. Kirkwood was kind of nowhere to be found after he had such a great outing at Long Beach last time out. Was kind of hoping to see a little bit more out of him. And then Ericsson started 23rd, finished 20th. Just didn't have a great day back there for Andretti as well. I think that there could have been a lot more from Andretti this weekend, and we just didn't see a ton. Herta was their best guy, but that kind of ruined, his great chances at maybe a podium or something with a bad pit stop there. And it was just a tough day for Andretti, I think, all around.
Yeah, that's a solid pick. Obviously, with Herta especially, a lot of pressure on him right now. So I'm interested to see where his season goes, and if he can come back here and really make a run here later in the season. For my personal pick this weekend, I am going to go with Kiffin Simpson coming all the way down here in 21st. Started in the top 10. Looked like it could have been a solid weekend for him. And, of course, with his teammate Palou winning the race, that's quite a high bar to reach. But also with Scott Dixon, starts all the way back in 26th. Obviously, not his best qualifying session there, but he storms all the way back to finish in 12th. A 12th is not going to be much for him to write home about given his accomplishments, but that's still a great recovery drive, whereas Simpson, starts in 10th and falls all the way back to 21st. So, yeah, that's going to be my pick for Stinker of the Week this week.
Yeah, I think that's fair, especially how good, the day started for Simpson. He was running up pretty high. He got, into that top 12, which was great, but, yeah, not a good day during the actual race at Barber. I think that's a good Stinker of the Week as well. That's everything we have for this week. We'll be back next week. IndyCar is back on Saturday, NASCAR on Sunday. No F1 next week, so we'll just be back with NASCAR and IndyCar and, any other news that drops that is very important to touch on. Other than that, though, thank you guys for listening, and thank you for joining, Sam. We'll see you guys next time.
Yeah, thank you guys for listening. Well, we're looking forward to it again next week. It'll be a lot of fun.